Hello and welcome to Aurelian University. In this video, we're going to cover a couple things. Primarily, I want to talk about for loops in Python. These can be really powerful ways to reuse code, essentially. So I'm going to talk about how we can repeat certain actions. Briefly, I'm going to talk about the Modulus Operator because it's going to essentially help us use the for loop in a slightly more interesting way, and how repeating can happen through lists and loops, and briefly what lists are and how we can exit loops early. So really quickly, let's go through this code. What a for loop is a for loop is repeating. It is code that allows us to repeat a certain action, generally for every element in some sort of list. Okay, so lists are Python objects that we create that contain lots of data. So down here we have an example of a list. We've named it animals. It's stored in a variable just like other data. And over here we have a bunch of different animals, each stored as a string, separated by a comma, and between these brackets. So this is called a list. If you know some other programming languages, a list is very similar to an array, for example, in JavaScript. But so what this does is, instead of just storing one thing in the variable animals, it stores multiple things, and they're all separated by a comma in this list syntax. Another way to create a list is with the range function. The range function just creates a list. If you put a number into it, it'll create a list 1 through 10, or as we have here, you put 10 in, it'll create a list 1 through 10. There's some other cool things we can do with the range function, but for now, this is going to be sufficient. So what this does is we say for each item, and you can put anything in here, any variable name in here in the for loop, for each item in the list, here the list that we're creating, which is numbers 1 through 10, we're going to execute this code. And over here in our code that we're executing, the first thing we want to do is we want to check if it's even. And we'll know if it's even using this modulus operator. So the modulus operator is an operator just like plus or minus, except for it returns a remainder after division. So what we're saying here is x modulus 2 equals 0. That's how we would pronounce it. But what we mean is if x divided by 2 has a remainder of 0, so x modulus 2, or that would give the remainder of x divided by 2. So if that is equal to 0, then the number is even. Otherwise, the number is odd. Right? So we're going to execute this code, and then I'm going to actually go ahead and comment out this code over here because I don't want you to see what it does until we run the other code once. So I'm going to run this Python 3 lesson 5.py. And so this, for each number in that list 0 through 10, and it stops at 10, so before you get to 10, it tells us whether it's even or odd. So really that's not too useful because you probably know which of these numbers are even and odd. But if you had some program that was doing a large amount of math, you might want to check if something's even or odd before you do certain types of math on it. But now let's talk about this list here, the animals list. Say we have a list, but we're not really satisfied to do the exact same thing on every member of the list. And it's not something mathematical where you can just check out the math to see if it works like up here. We want to be a little bit more tailored in what we're doing. So for y in animals, this is going to execute this code for everything in this list. If y equals cat, and we use this double equal sign here, this will tell us if remember we use the single equal sign to assign a value to a variable. Double equal sign will say if something is equal to another thing. We'll use it for conditionals. If y equals cat, continue. What that means is don't go on to this code down here, go back up and loop, or go back up and run the code for the next item in the list. So what we're essentially saying is skip cat. Once we get to cat, skip it. And we'll see why we want to skip it here. Otherwise, we're going to print a, and then the name of the animal is a great pet. So we wouldn't want to print a cat is a great pet because obviously cats are not terribly great pets. And notice also here, instead of $D, we put $S. That's just saying we're putting a string in there instead of a number. So that's why we're skipping cat. And then also after we get to parrot, so if y equals parrot, so once we've gotten to parrot and executed the code for that, we've put break in here. So whatever's after parrot, we don't want to print out that it is a great pet because maybe it's not a great pet. And so I'm going to run this code now. So you can see we've printed out a dog is a great pet, a fish is a great pet, a parrot is a great pet. We were able to skip cat continually. This continue statement said if it says cat, continue, go to the next loop, don't even bother executing code for cat. And then after parrot, we broke. So we exited the loop. And then I actually miswrote this here. This should say we did not exit the loop early. You can actually have an else statement with a for loop, and an else statement if used with a for loop instead of an if statement. What that will say is if we don't exit this loop early, then execute this code. So if I were to, for example, take parrot out of here, then we would never exit this loop early. And I will show you what that looks like. Within 5.py. And this says we did not exit the loop early. So that's a handy thing to have. You'll use it in some context, but for now, the else statement in for loops is not something you need to really worry too much about.